Welcome back to Soulrocker podcast, and I am your host, Vanessa Delgado. So, in today's episode, I'm diving into suicide and specifically my story on suicide that I had when I was in my senior year in high school, which was, I was 18, turning 19. I was held back when I was in second grade, so that's why I was a little bit older. However, it's obviously, this is a very serious topic and I don't really know exactly how to start it off, but I guess I'm just going to dive in and just start off by saying honestly, I feel like there's no one way to suicide. Speaking from experience and from some research that I have done, I even continuously look into this kind of thing. And anyone on the other end who's not dealing with thoughts of suicide or who maybe have lost someone to suicide and the self-blame or guilt that you may feel for helping is very hard, but also one can hardly not always know. I just want to say that it's really hard, I understand, to feel that guilt. Especially if you have lost someone close to you who you feel man, I wish I could have done something, or you blame yourself for not seeing the signs, or thinking to yourself, overthinking whether was there any signs that was it my fault, blah blah blah, and honestly you just never know. Some people won't show any signs at all. So having thoughts of suicide is not really normal, but many people have experienced having a thought, which is known as ideation, at some point in their lives. Even if it's just a quick passing thought, especially when maybe we're having a down, lonely period or moment, and where you think you might think of something I wonder if I would be missed if I was gone, or man, it would just, I really wish that I could just be ran over with a car right now, because I just really can't deal with life. That's essentially a thought of, suicide, or being gone. Often that is accompanied by the thought of, wait, what am I actually saying? So it's we'll have those thoughts, and then all of a sudden you're it'll just slap you and be wait, what the hell am I saying? But it doesn't actually make someone suicidal necessarily. I think if one has these thoughts more frequently, and it's not just what I think, but this is actual research where it's if you have these thoughts more frequently, even if you aren't planning is a huge sign. It's a sign that something is off within us. And I don't mean there's something off, there's something wrong with you, which is totally different. But there is something within us that feels off, that maybe we can be curious and dig into. There could be this core wound or a need that is not being met, and we need to get curious and figure it out. And this is where reaching out for help therapy comes in handy, because it's what is triggering this feeling that we feel and think that you're suffering so badly, and what is occupying your mental space so much that essentially becomes so daunting to live through it. So one often thinks consistently of suicide because we can't bear the same racing thoughts and feelings that we feel that it's so heavy to deal with, and you feel there's no way out. So one can have suicidal thoughts and not always have depression, because a lot of times people accompany they'll say okay, if a person was suicidal or is suicidal, that they must be depressed, but that's not always a case. According to research and psychologists, suicidal thoughts typically don't exist without another form of mental illness like anxiety disorder or BPD, bipolar, eating disorders, things like that. But it doesn't necessarily always mean that the person is depressed. So there is a difference in that. Now, in my personal case, I had thoughts, but they weren't constant or consistent. usually in moments of deeper despair, I would have suicidal thoughts of some sort. But it was kind of like a quick passing. Like I wouldn't sit there and like plan or really get deep into it. It was just kind of like a passing moment, kind of like what I mentioned, and then that was it. But it was still something that was consistent to the point where it was like when I was really struggling was when those thoughts would come in. On occasion, I would sort through ideas of which one takes their life, but never actually considered moving it to the next step in a planning aspect of it. I was just like, I wonder what it would be like if I took this gun that my mom has and like, what if I shot myself? And just the thought of that like was scary. And I was like, it was like I would have these thoughts of like, maybe I would shoot myself on the, like on the head, but what if I missed, and then that leaves me with like, fucked up for life? Or like, what if I swallow and I, do it that way? Or I would think about like drowning. Like I just thought of different things and how like how long it would take me to die, or how would the pain be, what's the easiest way. Like I would think of things like that. And this was something that I dealt with on my own, probably in a time frame of maybe when I was about like 13 to 19, is when I had these, I guess, suicidal thoughts, but they were off and on throughout all those years. And so my memory is not the best at all due to childhood trauma. So I have very like foggy, spaced out memory. And so that affected my time. This affects my timelines all the time as well. And in any case, I can't remember any specifics that drove me to a night prior to my attempt to have the suicidal thoughts, followed by creating essentially like this plan. And that just kind of happened out of nowhere. I think it was a combination of things such as like my anxiety, of which I've always have had, and it's always related to like the future. And I was a senior in high school, and I was feeling nervous and worried and excited, and just I had a whole bunch of different feelings. Sad about life after high school, feeling like I was an adult, but also like how like scary that kind of felt for me, and not knowing what I was going to feel or how much my life was going to change. Like I wasn't quite ready for such a big hit. And like I'm a Taurus, I'm always saying like astrology, like I'm a Taurus, and change is exhausting and scary for us in most earth signs. So I think that could have helped. I think what could have helped was to have multiple talks with like my parents, and if I would have had talks with like my friends, and maybe even like, maybe like a teacher or some sort, where had there been a moment of acknowledging and asking, one's feelings, my feelings, and for a parent or teacher or role model to offer words of encouragement, validation, I think would have been so helpful. And had I had friends who, or felt more seen and confident, where I could have asked like, was I the only one that was feeling this way? Because it felt like when I would kind of have those moments of like just really observing, all the students around me, all these kids around me in high school, I was like, I just felt like so alone, because I felt like there was so many kids that seemed like really excited to get out of high school. There was a few that did kind of just like, I could tell like they were just going to be kind of stuck here and not really go out to college and just maybe get like a little job and stick with their parents. Like I could just kind of, I had that vibe from them, but I didn't ask them, because I lacked a lot of like confidence at that time to really be like, hey, like let me seek out these people that I'm getting this intuition that like they probably might feel the same way. Let me ask them. But overall, it just kind of felt like I was alone, because it felt like a lot of just the kids around me were like excited and like ready to start a new chapter in their life. And I was like, I had no idea where things were going and how, like I just said, like how I was going to feel. Like there were just so many questions and so many like emotions and feelings and thoughts that were running through my mind that whole year that really was like kind of adding to that anxiety that and other things that had been just really tough for me. And I was also dealing with not having the healthiest relationship with my mom or my dad, really, and not feeling like I had support or loved by my dad or my mom, quite frankly. And I didn't feel like I had good friends. Like at the time I had a boyfriend, but I had so many fears that I made a lot of mistakes and was really like avoidant and emotionally distant from him. And, it didn't really quite feel like he was like a boyfriend, and especially like a supportive one, because of course I didn't allow that to happen. So it made me feel very isolated and alone, afraid, and just exhausted. And by that time I had also experienced some financial trauma. Trauma. That's a whole other topic, but I had already experienced a lot of that. And all these things is what drove me to wake up in the morning on a weekday, just a few weeks away from prom. And I remember my mom was up early because she was going to get some labs done, some blood work. And I was getting ready for school, and just this despair that I had felt, kind of like all wrapped up into one. It was like the school, like it just was getting, like I said, this was like a few weeks away from prom. And, I think like I said, I'm really spacey with my timeline and my memories, but I think there was like, just, within those a few days or whatever, like I think there was some like an argument with my mom or my dad, one of the two, maybe both. And just kind of like having a lot of even that kind of like bunch into one, just like kind of thinking about how my relationship with my parents have been just all my life, and other things that I don't really want to share just because this is not the episode to do that, but essentially like there was a lot of other things that were going on as well, and I remember seeing my mom get into the car and driving away, and I had a moment of like seeing her drive off and just being like, wow, this is surreal, like last moment to see her, because essentially like the night before I was already feeling really like, I don't even know, like a despair, just like a lot of feelings that were so overwhelming, and I felt exhausted, and I was already kind of planning, but it was more of just like a thought, and it just kind of happened out of nowhere, whereas like that morning I just was like, fuck this, I can't do it anymore. And I then worked up the guts and ran into the bathroom, and I opened the door, and I opened like this new container of ibuprofen, and I got a bottle of water, and then started popping pills like one at a time. And the idea and expectation of choosing this method came from watching so many like Mexican novelas, because like I said, over the years I've thought about like different ways of how somebody can take their life away, and everything just seemed so scary, because I was like, oh God, like what, like I just said, like what am I going to experience pain wise? Like I wanted it to be like, something that wasn't going to be so painful. And what if I fucked up and like this would screw me big time? And so I, and then just really seeing these novelas and how how they made it seem, I was like, okay, this is like my go-to. And the expectation was to take a few pills and fall and faint and like literally die almost instantly. Like that's what the novellas showed, and I was like, oh, that's exactly what's gonna happen. So here I was popping pills one at a time, because I was not like, I really wasn't that gifted in popping pills like that. But so I kept popping them and becoming disgusted from so much of the sips of water and swallowing, because like I said, I just could not do multiple, and I just felt like there was nothing was happening, nothing. I was like, I literally got to like this, and like this was all happening in the dining room. So I went downstairs and I started, for some reason, I don't know why I picked the dining room, but that's where I went. once I popped a good chunk of the bottle, like this is a brand new bottle, and I don't know, I probably close to like 100 pills because I drank quite a bit. It was, I don't even know, like I didn't count anything, but like legit, it was a lot. I was like, okay, this is a lot of pills, and like I'm not feeling anything, like nothing is happening. I was like, okay, what did I do wrong? Like I was confused, and I was starting to feel scared, and so I called the 911 because I was like, well, nothing is happening, but I know that this is gonna lead to something because this is obviously like not healthy. So I called 911 because I was like, I'm definitely not dying, so like let me just get some help here. So I called 911 and I started giving them the details, and in just those couple of minutes and moments, I slowly started to get like affected, and I started to see blurred vision and sort of like losing recollection a little bit, and like I felt like I almost was having a little bit of like slurred when I was, you know, talking. And within a short couple of minutes, the ambulance appears, and just a minute after, my mom pulls up also, and I could barely like walk to the door to open it for the paramedics to come in, and they essentially like right away, like they helped start walking me into the ambulance. And I could barely like see at that point, and I could barely like hold myself up. I just felt like weak. Like I felt like I wasn't even present in my body. Like I was having like an out of body experience, and I laid down on the gurney, and they were trying to keep me awake the whole entire ride. And we arrived at the hospital, and I sit in the wheelchair, and they wheel me in, and again, like I can't see anything. Like everything is so blurred. It's crazy. And I think I lost conscious because the next thing I knew, like all I recall is like barely walking through the door, and the next minute it was like I woke up to me laying in, you know, like one of the rooms in like a bed, and my mom and my boyfriend at the time was sitting over by my feet. And I woke up, and the nurse comes in and she let me like wake up, obviously, after a couple minutes of me kind of like regaining consciousness, and pretty much immediately brings in this drink of like, it looked like charcoal and it tasted like it, and I'm not sure what's it called, but might be called, I don't know, but essentially it was like, it's helping you flush out obviously all the medication that I had. I had the hardest time even bringing the cup to my mouth because I was feeling horrible, not just to being fully conscious, but I like felt weak and shaky, and I felt extremely nauseous, and they gave me water, Sprite, to help me drink the liquid. Like, so I was like essentially drinking in between because I couldn't chug it, but I was like taking the smallest sips, and then I would like take a sip of like water or like Sprite, and like just trying to like get as much as I could in. And finally I was able to drink most of it after like quite a while of struggling. And then I started throwing my life away, and that was definitely like not an experience. Like I don't like throwing up at all, but this was like on a whole nother level of throw up, of vomit. And I threw up so much and couldn't eat for a couple of days that I lost quite a bit of weight, and I stayed a day or two at the hospital under 24/7 supervision, care per, you know, their protocol on suicidal people. And I believe the treatment plan was like taking some medication for a short period of time, and then followed by a few testing that they had me do, and doctor visits. And then also they required a short period of seeing a therapist, which in that experience, it was not like the best experience. Like it just felt like exactly what, you know, one thinks of like therapy. It's exactly what it was like. So I think there was like a bit of like the negative experience that I had for many, many years led me to never really consider therapy, and just have a negative you know, like a view of it, like everyone, or like a lot of people do, because of that experience that I had. You know, it was like, yep, it's true. So the nurses and the doctors at the hospital told me that I would have died had I not called 911 and got in at the time that I did. Like I drank enough pills to OD, And it just, even though I drank so many, it like didn't instantly, kick in as soon as I was thinking it was going to. Because we know that like medication, when we pop a pill for like Tylenol, but at the time I didn't think of that. Like it usually takes like a half hour for it to kick in, Obviously I kept taking them in, and it probably took me about that long before I started to feel any kind of effect. But I was thinking, based on the novelas, that it was like I would take like 10 pills and I'd be like down, and for a full 2 weeks or so, I just felt so weak and exhausted, and the feeling just like persisted nonstop. And along with not being able to stand too long before, I felt like I just was like super dizzy all the time, and I felt like I was spinning even laying down, and I felt this persistent like nauseous feeling that just would not go away for like 2 weeks. And I remember that during that moment, that the need I was wanting to deep down meet, besides the overwhelming of emotions that I didn't have the capacity to process at the time, was of leaving high school and entering a new phase, and not having the space to, was like essentially not having the space to process and speak and get validated and encouragement, that there was this need to and then there was also like this need to feel loved and wanted on top of that, to feel like I was being seen and heard, and not feel so alone that I was seeking, but I wasn't quite aware that that's what I needed or how to get those needs met. Many of us, especially as a teen or a kid, don't actually have the capacity to understand our feelings and our needs and how to go about meeting them on our own in healthy ways, or asking for what we need. Those deep down needs and desires that I was essentially seeking, even at that much of a serious situation where my parents could have lost their only daughter, didn't get the full response that I yearned for. Like, both of my parents' reaction showed concern, but not quite the way that I had envisioned. So yet again, I felt this sense of abandonment from them. And nothing really changed after that. Like, sure, for a short period of time, they showed like a little bit more concern for me. They were a bit more sensitive towards me for a short while, but eventually that didn't make a miracle of a change between what I needed from them, let alone my inner child, who was the main one screaming for these needs that she felt abandoned and angry about. I honestly don't even remember me sharing much, or if anything, to my friends at all. Like, I don't even know or remember if I told any of my friends that I tried to commit suicide. Like, I know that I was out of school for like at least a week, but I don't know that I actually shared the reason why. Like, I might have shared, that like, oh yeah, like I had to go to the hospital, blah blah blah, but like I don't know that I actually shared the real reason. And most of my family, I don't recall them showing up and expressing concern. Like, it was communicated to them because everybody in our family just knows when somebody farts, but like nobody really actually shows any kind of concern. Or better yet, like maybe even like a wake up call for their own kids. Like, it just, none of that was, happening. And I wasn't disappointed about the failed outcome, but I was disappointed that I didn't make a dent in anyone. So that left a confused aspect that I never really processed. And I didn't try to commit suicide to seek attention. Like I said, it was something that no one would have known, because I literally had like planned it like within a day and a half or less. So I fully intended to take my life away, but things didn't go as I had expected and planned, and so I felt stuck and confused. And I remember as I was swallowing those pills, my thoughts, besides I'm going to die any minute, were thoughts racing of all the pain accumulated. I felt it was a sadness and core wounding of how I was born from a rape and not ever feeling like I was enough or wanted by my parents. and they have never loved me and never will. Like, those were my thoughts. And they won't even care that I am gone. Like, I don't matter much to anyone. And all these core, like, painful beliefs is what was feeding me to commit to this action of suicide. After some time had passed, even over the years, I look back at those moments and experience, and I don't regret what happened, because suicidal thoughts, even though I have had plenty moments of despair, maybe far worse, over the years as an adult, that I've never looked at death the same way again or escaping it because of that experience. Like, I had those suicidal thoughts here and there, when I was a teen. But after that experience, never have I thought about suicide again. Like, in fact, I'm actually grateful for that experience, because it's led me to really be like, I'm supposed to be on this fucking earth. It is the same way that, like, my mom had told me. She's like, I was, essentially, like, I was created because of her being raped. And she was like, she's confessed to me that she tried to have a miscarriage. There is some physical abuse when she was with my dad as well. And she's like, you could have been born, like, I could have had a miscarriage, or you could have been born, like, with some mental illness or something. And sure, like, I do really feel like those things cause the anxiety that now I live with, and some of, like, the sensitivity to, like, my skin. Like, I do believe that. She was like, you were meant to be on this earth then. And she didn't say this, but, like, I'm saying this at, like, a second time where I tried to take my life away, and, like, it just didn't quite happen, mainly because of my like weird expectation on, like, what I was thinking. Like, had I just left myself kind of, like, waited out, I wouldn't be here. But I didn't. I was just like, thanks to that, like, weird ass expectation that was seen on TV, like, that's what saved me, honestly. And here I still am. And because of that, it's like, I've never thought about suicide ever again. Like, not even once. All I do when I do feel, like, really heavy, when I get into, like, little mini depressive moments, like, I don't really deal with depression at all. I never really have. Anxiety, yes. And just having, like, a lot of, like, thoughts maybe, but I've never been in a depressive state. Anything, it's given me a new sense of motivation to get past anything that comes my way, honestly. I have had to process what was going on and what I was feeling. Like, I've had to return to that. In some cases, a lot of people don't want to or can't, and there's, like, a fair situation where it's like, not everyone needs to process every single trauma, but there's just some that we really should, even if we don't want to. And this is one that I've never felt like, oh God, I can't, like, I've never felt like anything is so daunting that I can't even go back. Like, I know that I got the willpower and the strength to go back to any past experience that has been traumatic for me, to look back, because I want to look back. It's like, I want to, when you kind of think of it in a way, is like, I want to go back into that moment for that inner child and show up for her. Because to me, in a way, like, if I would be like, no, I don't want to work through that, or like, I'm good, like, I've been able to live through it, and like, I'm good, I don't want to go back because I don't want to feel those things again, it's scary. Like, no, I do want to feel those things, even if they are hard and scary, because I want to look, and I want to, like, it's like, I think about that inner, like, my inner child, and it's like, I'm turning my back on her. I feel, this is for me personally, I feel like if I were to just be like, no, I don't want to do it, then I'd be turning my back on myself. And I don't want that. Like, I want to show up for her. I have had to go back and process and things like that in order to, like, release some of those painful feelings and, really get to understand myself. What is it that I was lacking? Could there have been anything that could have stopped me that morning from doing it? And yeah, to be honest, as I said, I needed to feel safe, and that where I was going in life would be, would be like a learning and adjusting, but that I could do it, like that's what I really needed, was like to just be like, yeah, like to be validated that like, yeah, it's a little bit scary, and like there's going to be some learning and adjusting that you'll have to do, but like you got this, and had I had someone there to support me in that way, I think it could have definitely maybe changed for me, not for that to not happen. I needed my dad to be the father and get his prideful stick that was up his ass to connect with me better. I needed the critical ass perfectionistic mother that I had or have to leave me alone and offer support and encouragement instead. Not to try to tell me that like I was doing something wrong, or I could do this better, or that, trying to fix problems for me. Like I don't, I just needed love and encouragement and support. I needed to hear, I love you. I needed to have someone show up at that morning and give me a hug and tell me that everything was going to be okay. But like, who would actually know that precisely on that week, that day, that morning, to show up at my door and come in and give me a hug? Like no one is going to know something like that, And over the years, I have heard of people not close to me, but close to someone that I know who have passed away from suicide, and how devastated they were. And the guilt thought them like, man, I wish I could have tried harder to help them, is really more personal, in my opinion, for some people, per the negative feelings that they feel for their lack of actions or lack of connection to the person, in a sense. Like, they're more concerned about their own feelings rather than like actually that they would have been there. And like every case of suicide attempt is different. And when people say like often like no one ever knew how badly they were struggling with mental health, is because the person isn't always seeking attention to show any signs. Oftentimes the person feels like a burden. They feel alone. They don't trust anyone or feel seen or heard. Often what we need isn't even clear to us. It's a mental cycle battle one usually has been fighting for a while before they get to that point of suicide or the attempt of it. And many have not sought help, and it's far beyond what a person or a loved one can say or do. Many of us who attempt suicide regardless of success are selfless and do not wish to worry or put responsibility on anyone to carry what we feel, because we literally feel like no one can understand or help. And sometimes whatever it is that is making us consider suicide can also be embarrassing or shameful. Guilt for what is driving these feelings and desires, because sometimes some of these suicidal thoughts, like I said, are not attached to depression, but they could be attached to like having eating disorders. People instead, like, they don't know how to support someone when they're having such like deep problems and like fears and all this stuff when it comes to like for example, eating disorders. Okay, let's just say something like that. A person might be like, how the hell, why would you not want to eat? Or like, it's like they're projecting, they're just making comments. It's kind of coming off shameful if they were to actually open up to somebody and be like, hey, I want to kill myself because of my eating disorder. And some people are not even admitting that they have an eating disorder. So that's another whole other problem. And so like, they don't want to hear that like, oh, if somebody's deep into like an eating disorder, like they don't want to hear like, you just need to eat. Like, that's not, and that's what normally people that were close to it, or family, loved ones, blah, blah, blah. Like, that's what they're telling us, or telling a person that has an eating disorder, and then I'm just using that one as an example of how sometimes things like that can happen, and why it's just not easy or desirable to go and reach out to a loved one because of that same reason, and if they're really, some people, it's like, they are in denial about it as well. Like they're just not, like they're not going to tell you that they're thinking about death and this and that, you know. And in other cases, we see people, family around us, and people show us that we don't really matter. Like, who actually takes the time to ask, how are you doing? What do you feel? Shows real effort or interest to get to know you versus projecting, assuming, and surface level shit that this is why we feel so alone and have no space to connect and possibly move the needle away from suicide. Because, you know, there's a lot of times where I've experienced where it's like, you see your family, but it's like all surface level shit. People are projecting their shit, you know, they're like, oh yeah, and like they're assuming, you know, like that kind of, like this kind of thing honestly requires professional help. But if there's a negative stigma around it, then, or this unrealistic expectation to visit a therapist and to feel healed in these suicide thoughts, and mental health free is just gonna like disappear in like just a couple of visits. You know, that's another problem. And that exhaustion that these feelings and thoughts take us so much from our daily lives, and one feels disconnected from self, which then drives this barrier between meaningful connections with others. Then all we want is to make it stop and go away. And that's what some people turn into drugs and alcohol and suicide and to break free. But then it's just difficult, guys. Yeah, so that's kind of my experience and my thoughts during it. I, you know, should have warned that I don't think I said anything that was too crazy, but obviously it could be triggering for some, and I should have put this in the beginning. But I think if you're going to click onto this, then you're gonna have to kind of like know that this is just obviously a serious situation. And I hope that, you know, me sharing like my story, my perspective, and just some of this info, like that it helps someone. Maybe, I don't know, like just I hope that it helps someone. And obviously you guys know where you can find me, and it's all like in the notes that I leave. If you guys have any questions, have any comments, please reach out to my Instagram, and I would really appreciate it. And I hope that, you know, this also brings kind of like what I was thinking about when it happened to, you know, I was like, maybe this was scared. Like the fact that like it didn't happen the way that I wanted it to, and I didn't take my life away, and I was still here, you know, at that time when it happened. I remember just like thinking, well, I hope that it served a purpose, right? That this experience served a purpose, not just for myself, but for other people, especially within my family. You know, I don't know if any of my family members struggle in the sense of suicide. I don't even know how much of like my actual cousins know about this story. I feel like, you know, when this happened, I was a senior in high school, and I'm the oldest grandchild. So I don't know that like my cousins who were just a couple years younger than me, how much of it did they know? They never really asked me. And then obviously like my cousins that are like a little bit younger than me that were, you know, probably like in middle school, like, you know, it was hard to, I don't know if they knew. I don't know if they found out. And I don't even know if they're listening to this, you know, but that was one of the things that I thought about, was like, well, I hope that this served a purpose, you know, because even though, like I said, it seemed like it made a small dent to my parents for a short while, it didn't do it, you know, as much as I had hoped for. Once I was like, oh, well, I guess I didn't die. So, I wonder how much this will affect my parents. And in a way, like I didn't have very high expectations. I had hoped for more change, but it didn't actually quite happen. But at the same time, like I wasn't overly disappointed, because I've never really had big expectations with my family. I think from a young child, I realized that to me, it was just like, I don't matter to them. They don't really love me. It's like all conditional love. My dad just doesn't give a shit, like that was kind of like what I felt. And so the expectation wasn't really the highest at all, just because that's what I think that was like a coping mechanism that I learned in order to survive the fact that like I wasn't getting all these needs met emotionally and even physically through my parents. So you learn, or I learned, that I had to essentially let go of that they could meet my needs, and I had to figure out how I had to meet mine, which didn't really have much of a process. But as kids, we do what we can and what we know and how to meet our needs. And it was going to be far more devastating for me to try to count on my parents to give me that, so that's what I share now too. And I've shared this already on social media before. And, I made quite a bit of a depth like post, but I feel like this here was a little bit even further in depth. I hope that it helps. Like I said, I hope it helps someone. So thank you guys for listening. Until next time.